Welcome to Old Crow's Classic Cars Shop and Sale. Doing complete restorations. Zoom in, you fucking bastard. Jesus Christ. God damn. The Crow. Alright. Well, as funny. There we go. There we go. Affordable. Many cars under $10,000. Friendly service. Oh, the girls won't be here, unfortunately. Complete restoration. Alright. As funny and coincidental as this sounds, as we're just a couple of days from Halloween, this is not funny at all. Not fucking funny. But, I was, driving in the highway, freeway, speedway, whatever. And, I noticed the car started to get, a bit of a rattling sound at high speeds. But then all of a sudden, there was this awful, like, banging sound of metal banging against metal. Let's see if I can demonstrate it to you. Like that. Just like that. That's the exact sound. And then if I tried, but the car would still move normally. So I thought to myself, well, it's not a, yeah, maybe I'll put the camera down here somewhere. I don't know if you guys will be able to see me or not. Let's see. Hopefully you will. Just give me a minute, guys. Enough with the Halloween stuff. Where's my hat? Shit. Fuck. Hang on. Apologies there, viewers. But so I was driving down, and like I said, I heard the sound. Just like that. That was the exact sound. So the car would still move normally, move freely, and but the noise just got worse and started. If I hit the gas, right, the accelerator, so at higher engine speeds, higher RPMs, the sound would get louder, and also worse, like it would start to actually have a bit of a grinding sound to it as well. I would have showed it to you guys, but I just ended up sorry, damn. So I ended up stopping the car at a gas station, had to wait for a tow truck and all that shit. Not a nice experience at all. Right? But anyways, I got back home. I got back to the shop, and once again the car would start normally, still with the sound, but the engine would crank, so it's not seized. But when I was actually driving when the incident happened, well, there's a couple of differences of problems with the engine. that I'd like to talk about. I checked the oil. One of the first things, the first thing I did was check the oil. I shut it off, waited a couple of minutes, checked the oil. The oil was good, and no oil loss, right? Because the thing is, with the manuals actually mentions that with cars under 100,000 miles, the engine is still new, right? And so there's a little clearance between the parts, so it's actually working rougher. Everything is just tighter, right? So it actually says to not drive at continuous high speeds. High speeds being above 60 miles per hour. Don't drive continuously, because the oil loss starts to become greater. It starts to lose oil, and then that will cause the engine to seize if there's too little oil, right? But obviously, I mean, if there's too little oil, you should be able to see it on the gauge. You should also hear the sound I with my experience already know what it sounds like, but it's just you can sort of the engine's not running smoothly when you have little oil. The engine is just running rougher, and you can hear a bit of grinding, right? You can sort of hear it's sort of like a mechanical sound. A little hard to explain, but yeah, the best I can describe it as is sort of grinding, and then the engine starts to shake, the car starts to shake a little bit. You might actually even be able to smell. Temperature should go higher, because the oil does a lot of the cooling as well, right? If you lose oil, then you have more friction, therefore more heat, right? So, but anyways, I checked the oil. Okay, so let me just keep going on that. So this car has under 100,000 miles. So I was thinking, well, I shouldn't drive it at continuous high speeds. But back in the day, they didn't used to have things like zero doubling oil, right? But what you could do is, and some manuals for other cars actually mention this. What you would do for winter is you dilute the oil, the engine oil, with kerosene, right? 10% in most cases, so that the oil is now thinner. In winter, you use thinner oils, because the metal actually expands, right? Metal, it's actually bigger in the cold weather, but and the other extreme, there's it also also expands a lot in if there's a lot of heat. But for cars colder, you need thinner oil. Hotter, you need more viscous oil, right? So what they would do is they would thin the oil. Now the thing, what I'd like to mention about the oil in this car is that a lot of people, if the car starts to give out a lot of smoke and everything is fine, tuning, points, timing, all that's good, but there's still a lot of smoke coming out of the exhaust. A lot of people think, well, it's an old car, high mileage, so it's burning the oil, right? So what they normally do is they put in thicker oil, and that fixes it, or even little cans of oil thickeners, right? I'll show you one, just the one that I have here. So put this stuff in here, right? And as you can see, look at that. Just look at how thick that is. See, it's upside down and it's not even falling, look. Right, so this is pretty thick stuff. So this here was my first car, so when I bought this car, I actually didn't know anything about cars, right? So this has been a bit of a lab rat, but that doesn't mean I ruined anything, because more than being a mechanic, I'm a scientist and a very rational person, and that's pretty much all you need for these cars, right? Just a little bit of common sense, and you should be able to do anything and everything on these cars. Unlike modern cars now, you need degrees in engineering and IT. You need thousands of different tools. It just can't be done. These cars, they're very simple, right? As I said like so many times. So back to the oil story. When I bought this car, it was running beautifully. You could stand next to it and you'd hardly hear a thing. Right, nice, very nice and smooth sound, very quiet, no shaking of the engine. Right, but so sometime later, I did an oil change, and I started to know. Well, actually, I started to notice that the oil was getting, it was burning oil. Right, I checked the oil level and it was going down every time. So I thought, well, it must be. I actually didn't trust the speedometer because the transmission looked different. So I thought, well, maybe they changed the engine or they changed the transmission and maybe a different speedometer, whatever. So I'll just go ahead and try some thicker oil. And it turned out that I initially I had a 10W30 oil, and then I went to I tried a 20W40 oil. And it would still burn oil like crazy, and a lot of smoke. And I mean a lot of smoke, guys. Like the whole car would just get covered in smoke. Well, let me just Alright, the whole car just covered in smoke. But so with these cars, the good thing is that you can actually experiment with them. If you put too much oil in a modern car, it'll fuck up the sensors, and you pretty much need a new car. Adding too much oil can pretty much ruin a modern car nowadays, right? Especially if you have like diesel ones. You have a lot of sensors, MAF sensors, all sorts of shit. But with these cars, all that happens is, it burns a little bit it'll burn the oil out. You might get dirty plugs, which will eventually clean themselves out, if you will. So it's no big deal. But anyway, so I experimented with putting thicker engine oils and seeing two things: what happened to the fuel economy and what happens with the smoke. So I actually disconnected the fuel line from the fuel pump and put a little can, a little jar, actually, little jam jar with half a liter of gas. And I just run the engine just at idle, see for how long it would last, right? And it turned out that with thicker oils, initially it would actually use less gas. But so finally, I tried a 30 W50 oil. That's the thickest engine oil I could find, and then I actually added a bunch of that stuff that I just showed you, the really viscous stuff. It's called it's usually just called engine oil treatment, but it's just very thick stuff that thickens the oil. You just add it to the engine oil and it thickens it. But I started to notice that with the thicker oils, there came a point where there was no difference in the gas, but just a lot of smoke, and the oil would literally, it would literally go from full to minimum in under 20 minutes, guys. So burning oil like crazy and a lot of smoke. The engine was sort of like, compared to what it is now, at the time you might not notice, you might just think, it's an old car, it makes that sound, it's not as smooth. That's bullshit, guys. These cars run just as smooth, and I'm going to say perhaps even smoother than modern cars, right? If everything's tuned and correctly, as any other engine, right? The engines have changed little over time. Actually, I'm going to say they actually got 10 times worse. I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you in just a second. But so with the thicker oil, I was just burning more oil. So that's just a simple experiment where the if your car is burning oil, it might not be that you need thicker oil. It might actually need thinner oil. But so just a great little science experiment, seeing what happens if you add thicker oils. And it's not going to damage the engine. Nothing's going to happen to it. But just you'll have to watch the oil level, right? But so then I went the other way. I started going thinner oil, thinner and thinner. I went from 10W30 to a 10W20, and it would still burn oil, but a lot less. And then finally I went to a 5W20, and it would still burn oil. So then finally I took that, and it would still produce a fair amount of smoke on startup, especially on the second acceleration, the second idle, right? When it's cold, there's a very fast idle, right? And it would just burn a lot of oil and smoke. So what I did, but it was less and less, which means therefore that I need even thinner oil. Now the 0W40 or 0W30, 0W20, that's the lowest you can go with these oils apparently, is a 0W. They cost over $60, right? So, and I actually paid like under $20 for my engine oil, 5W20. So I said, damn, I don't want to pay that crazy amount of money for that oil. So what I did is I went ahead and bought myself some kerosene. And believe me, guys, I searched this up on the internet, and all sorts of different variations of the phrase, but I couldn't find any place that mentioned adding kerosene to engine oil to dilute it. Right? I don't know why it's kerosene. Maybe you could use diesel. I have no idea. But anyways, what the hell? All right. Anyways, so I went ahead and I added some kerosene, and that fixed it. Very little smoke, very little, and the oil wouldn't burn any more oil. Stayed in full, right? So you just keep trying that. Just keep doing that until you have enough, and it's no longer burning any more oil, right? So that's how it was there. Just give me a second here. What the hell? Hang on. So I guess that's pretty much done on oil, and I'll just continue my story. Hopefully this will help you guys if you ever have some of these problems, right? And don't forget that a hot engine or a too cold engine can also cause these problems. What I'm telling you is I'm giving you the example here. All those things out of the equation, right? So anyways, back to my story. I checked the oil, and fortunately there was no. It was just fine, right? Now, if you had an overheating engine, you can usually tell because you open the hood and it's like really hot, and maybe there's steam coming out, and you can barely touch it, and it's like just crazy hot. You can smell like burnt oil, right? But and what will happen is the car will actually start to get slower because of the pistons. Now there's a lot of friction, and the car will actually start to get slower and slower, and you can feel it's like really rough and holding no, not holding. Sorry, how can I describe it? It's just it's not moving freely. It's like something's holding it back, right? But that wasn't the case. But just in case, if you do happen to have that problem, don't just shut off the engine. If you're having an overheated engine, don't just shut it off. What you'll have to do is you actually have to slow it down and let it run for a few minutes, because if you just slow it down at once, there's just a big that'll actually might cause it to seize, right? So what I did is I just slowly let it idle for a bit, and then I'd shut it off, and a few minutes again I'll just turn it back on. But actually it was just, you can tell that it was still running smoothly, so it wasn't an overheating engine. I can tell it was an overheating engine. So what I did is I went ahead and checked the coolant level. In modern cars it says you're not supposed to do that. Even in the old cars it says you're not supposed to do that. But you just got to be really careful. You just slowly open it and you just let the pressure come off slightly. And I'll show you in just a second here. It's not hot, but I'll show you here in just a second. Yeah? So it's closed here, and there's actually a point where you can open it somewhat, and there's a little tank so it won't just pop off in your face. Just to zoom in a little here. So you can open it, press it down, it'll come up slightly, and that should already relieve some of the pressure. But what I did is, you shouldn't do this unless you really want to. It's not my fault if you mess up. If you just open it at once, this thing is hot, and what happens is another thing. The coolant, with more pressure, and this is pressurized for this reason. As the pressure increases, the boiling point decreases. So the more pressure it gets, it actually helps it get colder, if you will, right? So if all of a sudden you just open this up, all of a sudden there's no more pressure, and that liquid turns to vapor, and it'll go right in your face, and it'll just shoot off like crazy. Trust me, guys, I did this once. You don't want to do it, right? But if you just do it carefully, and you'll hold it like that, and you'll just angle it a bit so that a little bit of the air escapes, a little bit at a time. It'll just go. And just keep doing that. Don't let go. Use both hands, right? Both hands. And then you just do that. I just did that until it's until all the air came out. Because you're not supposed to remember. This is not supposed to be full all the way to the top. It's actually supposed to be full, only filled to 1 inch below the neck here. It says that in the manual. So this procedure will not work if you filled it up too much. Actually, it'll still work if because you see there's a little there's a pipe here, and it's just an overflow pipe, so that if you fill it up too much, pressure will increase and it'll expel the excess liquid. So if this spring here and this stuff is working fine, you'll still be able to do it eventually but if you try to do it right away, it won't work because there's just too much liquid. There's no air, right? So just keep that in mind. But if there is air and it's properly filled up, you can do that and just let the air go slowly, and then you check the coolant level, right? But you can usually tell if there's coolant just overflowing. This is a really old car, and they didn't have like another bottle somewhere else, a little container where you could actually see coolant level like you have in cars they made later on, right? Only a few years later, maybe even a few other models, different manufacturers, whatever. I mean, the Cadillac, the '69 Cadillac, has the other container, so that you can actually see the coolant level. Anyways, I checked the coolant, and it was fine also. Now, if you have these things, I'm going to say it's virtually impossible for this engine to seize. The manual even says there's no such thing as overheating for these cars. It's a cast iron engine. There's no overheating problem, so it doesn't matter if it gets really hot, as long as there is no coolant loss, right? So as it gets hotter, the pressure will increase. Maybe you have a bad hose, a bad hose clamp somewhere, and it will just start leaking, and then the engine is just dry, and then you'll start really getting problems there. But still, if you compare these engines to modern cars, you really got to beat them up to be able to seize them. And even so, you can probably unseize them later. Worst case scenario, you change the piston rings, change the pistons, and still, I mean, there's a site called EGGE, E-G-G-E, E-double-G-E. That's a strange name, but you can get piston rings, pistons for all sorts of cars, including this car there. I believe the full set of pistons, not piston rings, full set of pistons is like $400. Expensive, I know, but compared to modern cars, that's just nothing, right? But because now most cars, they're made of aluminum, and that's aluminum is just it's like butter compared to cast iron, right? And I don't know if it's well, this is actually cast iron, but apparently there's a difference between cast iron and cast steel. So some engines might actually look exactly like cast iron, because that's the thing with cast steel. It looks exactly like cast iron, but there's a difference, and you can do your research on that. But anyways, so it's not a seized or overheating engine. So I'm just thinking, what the fuck is going on? And I could tell the noise was coming from the inside the engine. And I could tell that it's one of the pistons, because once again, if the engine is overheating, or if there's little oil, right, either little oil or little coolant, antifreeze, if you want to call it antifreeze, that's what it's called as well, antifreeze or coolant, then the car won't run smoothly. Now there's a real good difference between running smoothly with bad sound somewhere in there than just running really rough. And that's the key to identify an engine with little oil or just plain old overheating, right? There's just it's not running smoothly, and it's really hot. Maybe you have I just can't. You just got to be reasonable about it. It's just like really hot. Usually you can touch the engine and the radiator like that, right? You can stay with your hand there with a fair amount of time without getting burnt. But if it's overheating, you won't be able. Even if you really touch it really quick, it'll still be really hot, and that's how you can identify it. So I ruled out the problem with the engine oil. So fortunately, that wasn't the problem, right? Because the engine oil was good there. And if you have engine oil, it's highly unlikely that these engines will seize, right? If it starts to get rough, because it'll start to get rough, you'll start to notice it before it's actually all seized and fucked up, right? So if you're reasonable, you'll stop the car and you'll see what's happening, and so it'll cool down, and it's not going to do anything to the engine. But if you run out of oil, it's a lot worse than running out of coolant, right? Because if you have no oil, then it will seize very quickly, especially if you're at high speeds in the freeway, right? So I ruled those things out. Camera's about to shut off in a few seconds. I'm just going to end this video here. And so I just talked to you about the oil, the coolant, And so I will now, the simple